You got an 80,000 pound truck going up against a 4,000 pound SUV or a 2,500 pound car. The physics, they don't lie.
Are semi-truck drivers putting you at risk because they're driving too long without brakes? Well, that's what we're going to ask the lawyer on today's episode. Hi again, everybody. I'm Rob Rosenthal with AskTheLawyers.com. My guest is attorney Brian Davis with the Davis Law Group in Asheville and Charlotte, North Carolina. Brian, thank you for making some time to help us out today.
Glad to be here. Thank you.
One thing I know, there's a lot of rules and regulations about 18-wheelers and the drivers and what they have to do. I assume there's rules about how long they're allowed to drive without taking a rest or some sort of break, right?
Yeah, absolutely. There are very sort of strictly enforced, we're supposed to be strictly enforced rules. Yes.
And what are those rules? How are they kept track of? How are they enforced or not?
Well, that's a good question. So there are basically two main rules for truck drivers. The first rule is what's called the 11-hour rule. And that's a rule that says that truck drivers can drive physically behind the wheel 11 hours a day. And that's it. That's the ceiling. That's as much as they can drive. And then there's another rule that says, it's called the 14-hour rule. And the 14-hour rule says after a truck driver has been on duty, that means being about the business of the truck company that he's working for, after being on duty 14 hours, he can't drive anymore until he takes at least a 10-hour break. And that has to be 10 consecutive hours, ideally in his sleeper berth or at home, getting at least 8 or 10 hours of sleep.
But you're saying those rules aren't always being followed.
Let me say it this way. I've been handling truck cases for going on 30 years. And I have yet to see a truck case where there was not an hours of service violation. In other words, I've not seen a case where a truck driver was not driving more than he should.
Wow. Now, in the old days, there was a logbook, which would seem to me very easily, it could be altered or not kept accurately. But isn't that all computerized now, Brian?
Well, the vast majority of it is computerized now. But there are still ways to get around it. For example, I've got a case right now where I had a team of two drivers driving one tractor trailer. They would alternate. One driver would drive for so many hours, then the other driver would drive. And the driver behind the wheel actually fell asleep because he had been driving 16 hours. And you say, well, how can he do that? We've got electronic logs. Well, he can do that because he was logged in at the time of the crash under the co-driver's login. So there are ways to get around it. There are ways to beat the system.
And I would assume finding out if someone has tried to skirt these rules would be difficult for somebody who doesn't have an experienced truck accident attorney on their side, right? I mean, you have to really know what you're looking for.
Well, you're not going to find it without a lawyer, and you're most likely not going to find it without a lawsuit. We have to dig into these cases in discovery, taking depositions, getting the court to order the truck companies to give up the documents that they fight really hard not to give up. That's how you find it.
And this seems like an obvious question, Brian, but what's the danger of somebody driving a couple extra hours than what they're allowed to drive? What are we doing? What is the risk?
Well, the risk is folks get drowsy. Folks get tired. I mean, being a truck driver is a hard job. It's physically demanding. Most of these guys, are just trying to put food on the table for their families. But the truck companies, they're the real problem. They're the ones that are pushing these guys to drive more than they should. They're making demanding schedules, deliveries that are hard to make within the hours. And that's why truck drivers drive more than they should. They have to, their livelihood depends on it.
And an accident with passenger vehicles can sometimes be very bad, but sometimes, it's just a fender bender or people walk away with minor injuries. An accident involving a big 18-wheeler, not as often that it's not going to be a bad accident. Is that correct?
Well, there are fender benders involving trucks, but more often than not, the passenger vehicle and its occupants sustained serious injuries, if not catastrophic injuries. And that's because the weight of the truck is so much greater than the weight of the passenger vehicle. And so, you got an 80,000 pound truck going up against a 4,000 pound SUV or a 2,500 pound car. The physics, they don't lie. It's not going to be a good situation.
Brian, you mentioned you've been doing this a long time with truck litigation. In your estimation, do you think now during COVID-19, both the quarantine and now maybe as some states are coming out of that, that's going to exacerbate this problem?
Well, I think that I think there's a big push and a lot of pressure on truck drivers to get their goods where they need to be because there is such a demand right now because of the virus. And I know that, we've certainly seen an increase in truck crashes within the last 4 months. The only thing I can conclude is it seems to be related to the virus.
What if somebody thinks, Brian, I'm not sure I can afford a highly qualified truck accident attorney to help me in my case? What's your answer to that?
Well, that's not really a legitimate concern because the lawyers like myself who handle these cases, we only represent individual people, real people. We don't represent insurance companies or corporations. And all of the cases that we handle are done on a contingency fee basis. There's zero financial risk for a client who needs a lawyer to find a good one, and then the lawyer will handle the case without being paid up front, without collecting any money for costs up front, and handle the case. And then when there's a recovery, the lawyer gets paid out of that. And again, if there's no recovery, there's no fee.
And as usual, Brian, I think it's important to stress time is of the essence. I'm guessing evidence can disappear very quickly. So getting somebody on to help you very quickly is the best thing to do, right?
That's really critically important. The reason is, truck companies understand the risk that they face when they cause serious injuries. And most truck companies are insured. Obviously, you've got to have insurance when you operate on the road like this. And the insurance companies actually have what are called first responder teams. Just like, the fire department has first responders. Well, insurance companies have first responders. And it's usually made up of a well-seasoned truck accident defense lawyer, an engineer, an accident reconstruction engineer, an investigator, and usually a photographer or a videographer. And that group, that team is dispatched as soon as the truck company hears about the crash. They are dispatched to the scene to gather evidence. And in my experience, unfortunately, sometimes they don't do everything above board and things disappear. So yeah, it's important that you get somebody on your side early in the game so that someone like myself, who we have our own first responder team, so that I can get my team on the scene so that we can gather that evidence and preserve it so that if we need it down the road, we've got it.
Brian, thank you so much. Lots of great information as usual. I appreciate you answering our questions today.
You're welcome. Thank you. Take care.
That's going to do it for this episode of Ask the Lawyer. My guest has been Attorney Brian Davis of North Carolina. If you want more great information or you're ready to choose a lawyer that lawyers choose, make sure to go to askthelawyer.com. Also, please take a sec to like, share, and subscribe by hitting the button at the bottom of the screen. Thanks for watching, everybody. I'm Rob Rosenthal with askthelawyer.com.